an honor and a privilege to be sitting in the Muriel Siebert room at the New York Stock Exchange here down on Wall Street with a team of women that are basically changing the way we trade equities. It's an honor. Thank you. Hope Jakarski, co-ed of Government Affairs, Elizabeth King, General Counsel, and Stacey Cunningham, COO. Thank you all. And I know you two traveled up from DC in the midst of yet another nor'easter here in sunny New York. So thank you for your efforts. What does it mean to you to be sitting here in the Muriel Siebert room? I love looking at her coat that she wore fur instead of the typical trading jacket. I mean, Hope, she paved the way.
She did. I mean, it's an inspiration to, all women, the three of us here, coming to work every day and knowing that there's this kind of history, both, with Muriel Siebert, with the future changes of the NYSE for women, and just, the history of being in this building here at 11 Wall.
Yeah, Stacey, trading has come such a long way since Muriel had to fight and fight and fight to get a seat on the darn exchange. We still don't see a ton of women down there, though.
We don't, and I have to give Muriel some props because she had a profound impact on my life personally, because I was a woman trader on the floor, and I never thought about it. I never thought for a moment whether or not that could happen and whether or not that was an opportunity available to me, and it's because Muriel paved the way. So I think it's just really important to recognize that anytime a woman pushes the boundaries and redefines the boundaries, she's redefining them for everyone else that follows her. So that I owe a lot of my career to Muriel in the first 10 years that I spent on the trading floor. But we still struggle to get women in finance and in the industry. While we have a lot of senior women in our organization, you're talking to three of them right now, and throughout ICE, our parent company as well, you still struggle to get the more equal ratio of women in finance in general.
For sure. And law is the same. I think law struggles just as much, especially law. You put law and finance together, you're probably one of the only women sitting at the table some days.
In some cases. I mean, there are more women in law than there are in technology or finance. And as finance moves more towards technology as other industries, that's another place that I think women haven't been as attracted to or encouraged to excel in. There are though more women and senior women in the legal group than perhaps in other areas of the company.
So let's talk about though your legal group, the advocacy that you're doing down in DC. I mean, you're shaping the future of the exchanges, the three of you. Hope, if you can start, what can people expect from the NYSE in the future?
I mean, at our core, the things we focused on are trying to make the markets more resilient, safer, and give investors more confidence. And so that cuts across what we do to ensure that our market structure is one that encourages investment and confidence from the trading community, and also from a listed company point of view. I mean, the reason that we're all here at the New York Stock Exchange is because of the over 2,300 companies that choose to list on the exchange. That's why we're down on the floor. And so we always approach every problem thinking about it from the listed company point of view and what it's like to be a public company in the United States.
And that hasn't changed for 225 years. Our core mission is to create markets that are meeting the needs of issuers and investors. We've been doing that for over 2 centuries. So we're transforming the markets as their needs evolve, whether it's regulatory, market structure, or technology.
Because that's what it is, right? It's cool to be an entrepreneur, and it's cool to keep your cash at home and not publicly list yourself, kinda these days, right? So Elizabeth, that's one of your missions, right? To change that, to get more companies to want to come public.
Yes, I mean, one of the things is we want companies to go public. We want, and the important part of that is it's a way for all investors and Americans to invest in the companies that are employing people and changing the country. And if they stay private, then the ability to invest in that future is much more limited than it would be if they were public companies.
They need to know the benefits of being public, though, don't they, Stacey?
They do.
Because I think there's a little bit of, Wall Street's vilified a little bit. It's like don't do it.
Yeah, Wall Street's vilified a lot. And I think, when you talk about attracting women to industry or attracting millennials to finance, I think there's an underlying PR problem. People often feel like the financial markets are a negative thing, that it's about making the rich richer. And we would argue the opposite. as Elizabeth says, I mean, the capital markets are really creating a framework so that an entrepreneur can access capital and make their products and services available to the masses and not just the few with means. That's a social good. We think that that's really important. And that theme of making the world a better place resonates with many of the younger generation today.
Yeah.
We need to tell that story, because then those public companies are held to the highest standards. They're focused on sustainability and good governance, and those are themes that do resonate with those that are entering the workforce over the past 10 to 20 years. We need to tell that story. It's really a PR issue that we think we have.
I totally agree. But Hope, we were talking about how it's so onerous to come public. Sarbanes-Oxley, you have all these rules and regulations. If I'm like in my basement, whatever I'm doing, making cookies, which my kids will deny that I can actually make a good cookie, I don't have the money to do all this stuff. So that's what you're trying to change, right? Make it easier.
Absolutely. I mean, the way we conceptualize it here at the exchange is really, kind of an on-ramp to becoming public, and then once you're public, making the highway free of potholes, so to speak. So we think about, ways to make it for somebody who is in their basement making cookies, who has access to all the private capital in the world today, including foreign sovereign wealth. What would make it attractive for them to become a public company, eventually list here on the New York Stock Exchange? And then once they are here and part of our community, what can we do to advocate on their behalf to make life easier? So things, like proxy advisory reform, Sarbanes-Oxley issues. We advocate for those issues every day in Washington.
Because Elizabeth, it did get very onerous, didn't it? Like, the rules and regulations were just, there must be piles of paperwork on your desk that you read through every day.
The exchange itself is highly regulated. It's always been regulated by the SEC, but what has changed over time is after each crisis, each problem, is there's more regulations,
Right.
both on the exchange and the public companies. And I wouldn't say that they're onerous. I think that they can be made smarter. And I think that that's what that Hope is saying. I mean, the Sarbanes-Oxley was born of a problem. Mm-hmm. And it was, I don't think that you want to get rid of Sarbanes-Oxley, but can you tailor that and make it smarter for companies that are smaller than General Electric?
Because it was all it's almost hindsight regulation, isn't it? It's like, darn, this happened. We got to fix it. This is the only way we know how. Throw something out
Right.
there.
How do we address the last problem?
Right, but we're not thinking about the next one. We're unfortunately behind the eight ball a lot.
Or always taking a look back to say, okay, so we put those protections in place and they worked largely well. Where are there areas where we can right-size them a little bit? Perhaps we overreached in a couple of spots. That seems to be the part that we don't do quite as well. We do well as to reacting to an issue. I think as a legislation through regulation, but we don't always go back and right-size it.
So what's the exchange doing then to look forward? How are you getting past that? Like, because politics, Washington is never going to change. It's consistently going to be hindsight 2020, or whatever. Shoot first, ask questions later. How do you look forward so that we get more people trading again? Because I have to believe there's still a ton of millennials who are hesitant to come to the markets. They're nervous. Everyone is afraid that the whole system is rigged. What are you guys doing to bring people back?
I think a lot of that has to do with simplifying the markets. The markets work very, very well, but they're more complicated than they used to be. That lack of understanding around the finite details of market structure are, I think, where people lose investor confidence. So we've been lobbying for simplification of the markets. We also lobby to make sure that the market's much more fragmented today than it was historically, because things aren't all trading just on the New York Stock Exchange. There is a lot of change, and so we focus a lot on how do we make sure that there are the right protections in place so that complexity doesn't impact investors.
How do we simplify that, though? Like, how do you make people understand that it's okay? Other than, it was a big campaign, is it incumbent on the media to get out there and tell the story more? Because I think it's very scary, especially when you have, just a couple weeks ago, we had a huge market drop. People panic, they sell at the wrong time, and it's like a big circular thing.
A lot of it comes down to transparency across the board on how our markets function, how things like market data functions. And when you have transparency and you have sunlight, investors are more comfortable. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about strategic ways that we can add transparency in a way that helps people understand what we do and give confidence to the retail investor who may think that the markets are rigged for one reason or another.
You mentioned the volatility we saw earlier in February. The markets worked really well during that period of time.
Right.
And I think unlike some of the other market events we've seen over the past few years, there was a greater degree of investor confidence, even though the markets were going down, because it was fair and orderly. And that's what people wanted to see. Historically, we've had periods where, because of the interconnected nature of the markets, there have been trades that have been busted. Or if you look at the flash crash, we saw, 2010, there was a lot of investor confidence that deteriorated because of how the markets functioned that day. As an industry, we've come together and put a lot of protections in place, and we didn't see that in early February. So I think that's a perfect example of how all of the work that we do to put more resiliency in the markets works.
There's a social implication to this, right, Elizabeth? I mean, if anyone is sitting home thinking they can rely on Social Security, they're SpongeBob crazy pants. So, we need people to say, I am willing to even put $10 a week into this market because it's what I'm going to have to live on. Otherwise, the government somehow, the government's not going to be there.
I mean, there's obviously most people have 401ks. They're not relying on company pensions anymore.
Right, that's gone too.
Social Security is probably not something most people are going to want to live solely on. And there really needs to be alternatives to that. It's very important that people are comfortable with the market and confident that it's a place that they can invest their money and understand it well enough and what their appetite for risk is to choose correctly, choose well.
We were talking earlier about the intersection of finance and technology. Like it's almost not a finance job anymore, right? It's almost becoming a tech job. We were saying when we got out of school, everyone wanted to go work for Goldman, JP Morgan, all the big banks. Now everyone wants to go work for Google. How do we change that? Because you can argue this is more technologically based than ever before.
It is. We leverage technology more than ever before, but we've always been on the front lines of technology since the beginning of time. If you look back to what it may have been in the early 1900s, and it was how do we get messages from between New York and Philadelphia more quickly between the two exchanges that existed back then, and there was a system of telescopes and flags that was used. Then it was the telegraph, then it was the telephone. These things sound like small, but now we're using microwaves and lasers, and it's the same concept that we're always pushing those lines. When we look at our systems today, we process over 50 billion messages in a day. That's using technology. I mean, that's what we do, and having that run at nanosecond timelines. We can get an order from New York to Chicago and back faster than you can blink your eye. That's technology. So again, I think it's how do we tell our story better and attract talent into the markets.
Yeah, what do you tell women, Hope? How do you get women back into this business? I mean, you're a mom, you have kids, and you're still changing the course of the equity markets.
I think it's really, sort of like Muriel Siebert. I don't compare myself to her personally, but just you can't be afraid to just have hope and want to, I never thought I would find myself in the job that I have today, at the intersection of so many amazing people and technology and new issues. So I think from a recruiting point of view, it's really just explaining to people what the markets are here for. Again, they're here to make Americans have confidence in our country. And that in and of itself is just an inspiring message that who wouldn't want to be a part of that?
Yeah, I loved what you said, Stacey, that it's everyone sharing in everyone's growth together, right? Like it's actually kind of really cool.
It is really cool.
If you think about it like that, like we want everyone to share in the growth of our country together. And so, I mean, women in particular are so nervous to invest. They're the first to put money in cash under their bed. What do you say to them, Elizabeth? You run the joint. Tell them.
I don't know if that's true, actually. The women that I interact with are invested in the market.
Good.
And if you were to distinguish between genders, they're probably going to invest less emotionally than men, which is probably a better long-term strategy anyway. But the women I know are invested in the market, and they're investing sensibly for their future, for their retirement, and for their children's education.
I think what's important when you're talking about attracting women or anybody to an industry, it has to start earlier. If you're talking to high school or college age kids and saying you should consider these career paths, I frankly think you're too late. We need to start with kids at a very young age and encourage them to follow, to follow their passions and their interests. We often steer women towards certain areas, and I think that, I mean, I just had recently, my cousin's daughter was really interested in robotics, and through social pressure ended up dropping it. And she said, no, you don't get to drop it. You have to join. And it was the other mothers that were saying, oh, we don't want to sign our daughters up because it's, they'll get made fun of. So if we're telling today's kids that girls shouldn't be interested in robotics, then we're delivering the wrong messages.
Oh, that hurts. That hurts just to hear that. Oh. STEM and STEAM are where we need kids to be, all of them, and that's the job. Those are the jobs. If you don't, I tell my kids all the time, if you don't figure out how to code, you're going to be living on my couch. Let's, if we could, go through each of you and talk about what worries you the most. Like, Elizabeth, I'll start with you. What's the one thing that worries you going forward, or what keeps you up at night as far as the future of the equity markets? Or maybe nothing. Because you just got it.
I sleep very well.
Because you're surrounded by some of the smartest people I know, so I would too, I guess.
What do I worry about? I worry about missing something. I mean, there's a great team here, and it's very, everybody is focused on not only the business initiatives, but making sure that we do it in a compliant way, which is my core responsibility, that we're doing things consistent with the law and the regulations that we're subject to. So I don't worry that I don't have that support. I do worry that we miss something, not because we're not trying, but because we're human.
And because, like we were saying, I feel like we're often one step behind. Like, there's always somebody out there, right? I mean, it could be the London whale. It could be like anything like that. Like somebody once said to me, if somebody wants to screw you, they're going to screw you no matter what you do. And unfortunately, I think there's that too, right? You're fighting human nature.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine something that's never happened before.
Right, exactly. Which, unless you go to Hollywood, they seem to figure it out every single time. Hope, how about you?
I was just thinking about your question as Elizabeth was answering. From what we do in Washington every day, a lot of what we do is, the results are in some ways driven by the whim of people that you cannot control.
Yeah.
We're obviously a heavily regulated organization by the government and by members of Congress who might have their own agendas. And so, to your point earlier about a blunt tool being used to address a problem retrospectively, that can come with a lot of really bad unintended consequences for the markets and for investors and for companies. So we're always trying to head that off.
I give you credit because I would think it's so frustrating when, I have a tax background, so anytime someone comes out with a tax rule, I want to blow my head off because, like, did you even look at the 1040? Like, did you even do that? So it must drive you insane when people who don't have legal background or any kind of regulatory background come up with these crazy laws and say, okay, now you got to go implement it.
That's why we spend as much time as we do trying to educate people.
I'm sure.
Educate
Because
policymakers every day and getting them to understand.
And of all things, the equity markets, because they're so confusing to begin with.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, and that's what I get concerned about sometimes. Are we hearing what the issues are for our customers? Are we understanding what they need so that we can be there for them going forward? That's a focus that has been core to our existence, and we just need to make sure we're always hearing their messages loud and clear.
What do you tell people who are still not back in the markets? Get in, other than that.
Be educated, be cautious, do your homework, understand what your risk horizons are, trade the right instruments. We've seen a tremendous growth in the ETF space, which has been wonderful, and it's allowed access to investors to asset classes they've never had access before to. And so understanding what you're investing in and taking advantage of opportunities that are new in the market is really much more. There are much more appealing opportunities than there used to be.
I just want to circle back. You said something earlier about simplifying the process. What does that mean exactly?
There are 60 different venues you can trade on today in the
Right.
U.S. equity markets.
Right.
There are dark pools. There are other exchanges. There are a lot of different venues, there are a lot of different order types, there's a lot of different information out there. And so trying to put that into a structure that investors can understand is what we're focused on.
I think you have to drop the word dark, because you put dark
It's not our word.
You say dark anything, I'm scared, and I'm
Yes,
thinking
they
it's
also
like
had a PR
horror
problem.
movie. Yeah, exactly. Well, you guys certainly don't. You're amazing. You should take the show on the road. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time. I think everyone should sleep better at night knowing the exchange is in such good hands with you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you.
Thank you.